Welcome everybody to the Town Board of the Town of Ossining work session for Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you to Pete Connolly for this flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think I need to iron my flag. Can you iron a flag? I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. So we're going to start off with some announcements, and then we will get into our work session agenda. As you are acutely aware, the U.S. is experiencing a spike in corona cases nationwide. Locally, we are seeing case numbers rise quickly as well, very unfortunately. Currently, the town has 14 cases, the village of Briarcliff has 18, and the village of Ossining has 136. And these numbers have ticked up very, very, very quickly. Colder weather is around the corner, and we need to all make a concentrated effort now to bring down our positivity rate. The Ossining School District switched to 100% remote learning to help mitigate the spike, and the New York State Department of Health issued new guidelines that went into effect late last week. The county has announced they are cutting back non-essential staff to 25% starting next week. In our town offices, we are also planning to move to reduced in-person staffing levels next week, which may require some shifts to our office hours. Rest assured, we will blast out via email and social media if our in-person hours of service need to change as well, but we are still committed to being available by email and phone to answer questions and do the business of the town. We will also consider implementing a state of emergency, once again, in case we will need to have the ability to act quickly should needs arise for us to do so to protect public safety. We know a number of our neighbors have done so already, and we will consider the same. The first new guideline limits indoor and outdoor gatherings. This is the new state guideline, and it limits indoor and outdoor gatherings at private residences. These gatherings have been a major contributor to the spread of the disease. Gatherings at private residences cannot exceed 10 people, not for a birthday, not for a holiday like Thanksgiving, for example, not for any reason. The only exception to the size limit is your household itself, meaning that if your household is larger than 10 people, it is not in itself considered a gathering. But also, you cannot invite anybody else over. Small parties and family get-togethers are consistently being cited by contact tracers, so I implore you to please take this guidance very seriously. The second new guideline focuses on gyms and fitness centers. These businesses will now be required to close from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily. Lucky for me, because I like to work out at 5 a.m. So don't worry, I'm not going to a gym. Don't worry, I was just joking. I work out at home. While we know our local businesses have made extraordinary efforts to keep surfaces sanitized and clean, these new requirements are also reflective of contact tracing efforts across the state. Please continue to support our local wellness centers, many of which were closed longer than other institutions this summer. Several offer online classes, outdoor classes, and other options. The last piece of new guidance relates to bars, restaurants, and any establishment with a liquor license, including event venues and country clubs. These businesses are also required to close from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily. However, delivery and curbside pickup without alcohol may continue after 10 p.m. Once again, I would like the community to take part in an effort to protect these businesses by continuing to patronize them through their takeout and curbside options. Shopping locally should not be limited to Small Business Saturday. And as you know, that we did have a proclamation for Small Business Saturday. I want to remind everybody that I believe that's November 28th. And that is the Saturday following Thanksgiving, and we want to make sure that everybody does patronize our small businesses that day, and do your best to patronize the small businesses first before going to big box stores and before ordering in from someplace else. While COVID has forced us to make a lot of changes, it has also reminded us of our responsibility to each other. Thank you so much to every volunteer who has come out to help during this difficult time. I'm so impressed to see so many people interested in getting involved, and so many helping to feed and care for our community. If you are looking to participate in our local government on one of the many volunteer boards in the town of Ossining, please take a look at some of the positions available on the Recreation Advisory Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, Board of Assessment Review, and our Planning Board. Interested applicants can submit a resume or similar description of your professional, educational, and volunteer background with a cover letter detailing why you would like to get involved in the Ossining community in this role. Send all of that to Victoria Caffarelli in the supervisor's office at vcaffarelli, C-A-F as in Frank, A-R-E-L-L-I at townofossining.com. More detail is available on the town's website, including meeting times that volunteers would need to commit to and more. Applications are being accepted through Friday, December 11th. If you have any questions about these boards and their roles and responsibilities, please feel free to contact me directly at 914-762-6001. This week, I participated in the Zoom launch of Cure 100, which we resolved to join along with the Village of Ossining and with the leadership of Susie Ross from Green Ossining. And now she's leading the executive committee of Ossining 100. Cure 100 stands for Communities United to Reduce Emissions 100%. As we open up the possibilities for our community to make use of the household carbon tracker, we hope to be able to share many tools and resources such as this one with our Ossining community so each one of us can learn how we can individually start making a dent in greenhouse gas emissions and help slow the climate change clock. We will be coming to you soon with our Energy Smart Briarcliff Ossining residential program through Sustainable Westchester to help homeowners change their heating systems to ones that do not rely on fossil fuels, cost less to maintain, and greatly reduce home carbon emissions, and they'll ultimately cost less to run also. So stay tuned. Before I begin to wrap up my announcements, I would like to announce that the equity survey created by the Community Equity Task Force has been extended for one more week. Over 150 people have already responded, so please don't be left out. The survey is open to all town residents, including the villages of Ossining and Briarcliff. You can find a link to the survey on the Town of Ossining Facebook page or in my Friday Supervisors Update. You can request a copy of the survey or to join the task force by emailing me at dlevenberg@townofossining.com. You can also email me to request hard copies for yourself or for distribution through a business or organization. Please feel free to share it widely with your Ossining and Briarcliff circles. We are going to continue sharing the survey through our Facebook and Instagram accounts as well until the survey closes. And lastly, please mark your calendars for this Thursday, November 19th, for our first public engagement session for the town's comprehensive plan. Many residents may not know what a comprehensive plan is or why it is important. Comp plans are used by municipalities to sketch out plans for the future, jumping ahead in our minds 10 years or more to appropriately plan and budget for changes. Beginning at 7 p.m. via Zoom on the 19th, we will host a workshop with residents to identify why you initially chose to live here, what you love about the town, what you might wish was different. Creating our comp plan will be a process that stretches throughout most of 2021, but these first steps help us to lay the groundwork. You can sign up for updates specifically on the comprehensive plan at our website by visiting townofossining.com/C as in car, M as in Mary, S as in Sam, /comprehensive-plan-2020. And that is it for my announcements. Do any of my board colleagues have any other announcements? And I see none. So with that, we are going to move right into our departmental report from our Highway Superintendent, Pete Connolly, who is here this evening with his cemetery hat on. Put your other hat on, Mr. Connolly, please.
I was going to do highway first.
Oh, you're doing highway first? Oh, okay.
I got to do them both.
Oh, you're doing them both. Okay, so you're starting with your highway. I thought you were just doing cemetery for some reason. Okay, well, put your highway hat on, and then we'll hear you with your cemetery hat on. Hopefully, you'll change your hat midway, and we'll hear all about what's going on at both. So, and we're very excited to hear about the cemetery too. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So, over the last few months, we completed year 2 of our guardrail replacement program. It was finished in early September. Approximately 1,000 feet of guardrail was replaced, with 95% being on Cedar Lane and a small portion on Blue Lantern off of North State. We continue with our annual vendor with the tree maintenance work. We really got zonked twice with the 2 tropical storms throughout the summer, and he's still catching up, and we're getting a lot of requests for, my tree doesn't sound good, doesn't look good, doesn't sound good in the wind. So if there are trees, we either trim them back or take them down if they are owned by the town. We're wrapping up some road repairs and drainage issues, and getting ready for Old Man Winter. We just received 100 tons of salt on the first week of November. Sunday night storm, we only had 2 small trees come down, both of which were off the road. But I understand Cedar Lane Park had some 4 or 5 trees come down across the roadway, the entrance to the park there. With the addition of our 2 seasonal workers, crews began vacuuming up piles of leaves that are placed on the edge of the road on October 18th. We've made 1 run throughout the town, the entire town, and we're making our 2nd pass now. So please be patient. We will continue to pick up the leaves all the way to the end of the year, weather permitting. I know the piles are getting big. Seems like they all came down at one time this season, but we do have crews out there, and we're doing the best that we can. A new generator transfer switch was installed at the Mystic Point lift station in October. And bids for the replacement of lift station generators at the North State Road and Parker Vale are scheduled for opening this Thursday. We lost 1 pump at the Cedar Lane station, which was over 18 years old. Probably the original. It stopped working the first week in October. And this was replaced with one of our spares that we have here at the highway garage. And the broken pump will be rebuilt eventually. So, on the cemetery side, we have 72 interments so far for the year. The crew spent the last few weeks resetting leaning monuments in sections 1, 2, and 5. All the monument foundation orders that we received by November 1st have been completed. We recently shut the water off for the season to the outside spigots there that feed the cemetery. And the exciting thing is the cottage exterior work is ongoing and coming along very nicely. The chimney has been totally rebuilt. The new roof has been replaced.
Do you want me to share the pictures?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Okay, I tried to do a little sort of before and after.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so this is the scaffold work that's there. That's the way the porch looked until yesterday when they tore it down. That's the old chimney. That shows the new chimney, the new roof, and the copper swales that are on the roof there. That's a nice shot of it there. That's the front porch removed.
I think that's all the pictures I have. If you want me to go back to any to point out anything more.
That's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, it's considering, I don't think he's had 5 dry days since he started. They're moving along very nicely there. It's got a, he really takes, detail into his work. His craftsmanship is great, and he's got to do a great job. So that's been moving along very nicely. So that's about all I have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Lots of great work keeping our roads clean and safe and keeping our cemetery looking mighty fine. So very appreciative of all of that, and also very respectfully. You always do everything very respectfully. So I appreciate that. I know that the town board does too. I'll open it up to my board colleagues for any questions or comments. And okay, Oh,
you go.
we got one, Northern
Hey,
Wiltshire,
North.
Councilman Wiltshire.
Pete. How you doing, Pete?
Good, Northern. How are you?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask one question on the chimney. That's replacing from the rooftop, or did you go inside, down to the furnace?
He replaced the inner flue with 6-inch stainless steel piping all the way to the boiler.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Had a hard time sliding that in and out, but he was going to splice it. But again, saying the kind of company that this is, he knew it would be a better job. He replaced the whole inner flue all the way to the boiler.
Okay. All right. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Feldman, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that the guardrails on Cedar Lane look great. So I did notice them.
They really do. Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. So moving right. I muted, I unmuted, and then I remuted. Sorry about that. Moving right along. Next up, we have a very exciting discussion about our proposed beekeeping legislation in the town of Ossining. We have a number of guests with us tonight to discuss our proposed legislation for beekeeping, and these guests are local beekeeping experts or have had something to do with bees and beekeeping legislation. So we're looking to have a fruitful discussion to wrap up some of the outstanding questions that we had from the board and also from our town building inspector. First, I would like to ask our guests to introduce themselves. I will say your name and then you can introduce yourself.
Supervisor, I think we're missing just a few people, so we might want to just give it a minute.
Okay.
Sent a few messages to
Well,
people. We should get everybody to make
I'll
sure.
introduce our first guest in any case. I see that we have a couple people here. Actually, why don't I just open it up to our planner, Valerie Monastro. Valerie, do you want to say anything before we start introducing everybody?
No, I think I'll just give a little recap. The town board actually went out for a public, this is a current public hearing that is still taking place on proposed bee legislation. We have received public comment from both the building inspector as well as the public on some remaining, or just a few remaining outstanding issues and concerns. And so we thought it'd be best to bring the experts for a general discussion of those concerns, really dealing with setbacks and some other conditions, dealing with enforcement. And then also clearly the Village of Ossining, which has had a very successful bee law on the books, and getting their feedback. And so hopefully that we'll be able to finalize the legislation and bring it back for any amendments back to a public, finish up the public hearing, and then ultimately go for an adoption of the local law.
Okay, so I think we are still waiting on Karen and Maggie. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. But I think
Or
we'll be
right, so
joining momentarily.
okay, they will be joining us momentarily. So again, I have a few questions that I know that the beekeepers and others would like to weigh in on. I would like to just thank the mayor of Ossining, Mayor Victoria Garrity, for joining us. She had seen this on our agenda and she said, hey, this was what I did. This was like one of the first pieces of legislation that I was involved with. And I dug right in and I know lots of stuff about it. And this is crap. You guys have to rewrite this. Well, maybe she didn't quite say that, but it was similar. It was like, you're good. This is much too restrictive. And she had lots of things to say about it. So while we were having all of our expert beekeepers and also our novice beekeeper, or our hobbyist beekeeper, that would be our one and only town assessor, Fernando Gonzalez, weigh in, we thought we would also ask the mayor if she would like to contribute. And I just brought a little example of our beekeeper extraordinaire. Well, I call him extraordinaire because he gave me this delicious honey from his bees' hives. Thank you, Fernando, for this really nice.
You're welcome. Enjoy.
Miel de Luna.
Miel de Luna.
So, okay, with that, Maggie, do we have Maggie now or we have Karen? I can't see. Karen
Me.
joined us. Okay, but we don't have
Yeah.
Maggie.
We don't have Maggie, but perhaps if you want to start going through.
Okay, so let's just start going around and I'm going to ask you each to just, I'll say your name and then you can just sort of introduce yourself and exactly who you are, even though I do know. Okay, so starting with Mayor Victoria Garrity, even though I introduced you already. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Mayor Victoria Garrity. I don't know if you want me to say a more professional version than my texting rant to you when I first read your proposed legislation, or if you want to give a history now, or just hold off until we get deeper into the discussion.
No, you can go ahead. Give your history. Yeah.
Okay, so it was, as you said, it was one of the first things that I did when I was elected mayor, and I started in 2013. And actually, I was just reminded that it was the first, it was one of the reasons why we ever started the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series, because I was just a few months into being trustee and I realized that forums like this, where we're in a board meeting, are really kind of difficult to get into thoughtful discussion with subject matter experts and as well as the community. And frankly, the community doesn't usually engage enough in these forums. And so I thought it would be really nice if, even though I was a newly elected official, if we could create a different forum that was not a regular public meeting. And so I started the documentary and discussion series, and this is our first screening, was Queen of the Sun in June of 2013 at the Ossining Public Library. And I think Valerie was there, because she was our village planner at the time, and our manager and our corporation counsel were there at the time. And then we also had Caroline Kerben was also there. I was talking about odds, the screening that we had, yes. And so we had some local beekeepers. There was a beekeeper from Yonkers who's obviously in an urban environment, and he was also a mentor who worked with a lot of beekeepers. We ended up having somebody in the audience who just heard about the screening and discussion, who was like an inspector, an apiary inspector from New York State. So I was able to communicate with him during our consideration of the legislation. And it came to us, I don't know the whole background of how it came to you in the town, but for us in the village, it came to us because the nuns at Mariandale wanted to have bees, which is a really unusual property in the village of Ossining. Obviously, most plots in the village of Ossining are very small. If all we wanted to do was create the ability for the Mariandale sisters to have a couple of hives, that would have taken pretty much no effort at all and very little discussion. But given that once we started learning about beekeeping and realizing the importance of being able to provide backyard beekeeping for the preservation of honeybees in the world, we thought we can probably do better than this. Let's learn about it. So some of the things that had been suggested were things like what I'm seeing in your very prescribed proposed law that you have right now, which talk about none in the front yards, only X amount of hives and X number of square footage, X number of feet away from a property line. And so what we did was we organized a field trip with myself, key staff from the building inspector, the lawyer, our corporation counsel, our village manager, and our planner. And then we had a local beekeeper who actually doesn't live in the village but lives nearby. And we had Dan, I'm forgetting his last name because at the time he was the beekeeper for Stone Barns. And we went to 3 different types of properties in the village, which are not so similar than some properties in the town. I live on a corner lot, so we looked at my lot where I obviously have a lot of street frontage. So that would very much limit where I could put a hive. And I said, okay, I'm not a beekeeper and I'm still not a beekeeper, but I asked the professional beekeeper, if I were your student and you were advising me, or you lived on this property, where would be the safest, smartest place from a beekeeping perspective, and how could that be safe or not for a community? Because not every property would work. You wouldn't be able to implement best beekeeping practices in every property. So we went through that same exercise in my corner lot, my neighbor's lot, which is surrounded on 3 sides, all relatively small lots, and then one of the properties on Camp Woods Road, which as you can imagine, some of those have super big front yards, maybe with some interesting growths, or a tiny little shed. And we went to these 3 different types of properties, and in each case we did this exercise. From a beekeeper's perspective, where would hive be successful? Where would an apiary setup be successful? Which direction would it point? And what would make sense for best beekeeping practices? And what we learned was, if we were to put in our law the type of sort of arbitrary parameters that were being suggested, nobody in the village would really be able to have bees except the Mariondale nuns, or if you happen to have some obscure property that would work. And so that's the problem that I have with these overly prescriptive legislation, is you actually are undermining the ability for there to be safe beehive. And I see Karen nodding her head because she actually knows what the best practices are. So really, if you look at the village code, all it says, it's a lot of following best practices, looking into best practices. There's not an X number, it's following the best practices, and an encouragement for beekeepers to be in contact with other beekeepers. It's a very self-selecting group. And so we've had it on the books now for 7 years, over 7 years in the village of Ossining. The way we approached it was very similar to New York City, which is we have a hive registration. If you go on the Village of Ossining website and just type in beekeeping, you'll see apiary registration, and there's recommendations in the process of how to do it. You're supposed to hand it into the clerk. I don't know how many people ever actually have registered, because we don't have record of anybody currently having their hives registered. I don't know if people actually have hives and they're just keeping it a secret. But the good news is I talked to our village building inspector, and we've never had one problem. We've never had one complaint. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of misinformation, there was a lot of encouraging us to do exactly what I see in your current legislation. And the reality is we didn't do that, and we've had 0 problems in 7 years in a much more densely populated community than the town is.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor. That was a great introduction. Next, we have Maggie Schwed, who's a beekeeper for Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture. And Maggie, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your feelings about our prescriptive legislation?
Hi.
Oh, there you are. I couldn't find
yes,
you. Okay.
Sorry.
Hello.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody. First of all, I think it's really great and important that Ossining is trying to find ways to be welcoming to bees. And I look after honeybees. I have 2 apiaries, 21 colonies, sometimes 24 colonies, plus a bunch of nucleus hives. And I've been working with bees for the past 5 years. I teach an extensive 17-week course with a guy named DJ Haverkamp from Bedford Bee. He really invented this beekeeping course, and I've helped him modify it over time. I was largely taught beekeeping by Dan Carr, who was just mentioned as the former beekeeper at the farm, and we've always had bees at the farm. I have to say that my work began with just the honeybees that I had to really learn so much about and then take care of for their health. That's sort of our mission with the honeybees, is to raise them in a healthy way and see how they interact with our ecosystems on the farm. And over time, to judge how we're doing, both in the ecosystems and with the health of the bees, partly as a result of the kind of nutrition they're getting and sort of diverse, abundant nectar and pollen sources, and partly to be able to see much more about wild bees and native bees, because while it's true that 1 out of every 3 bites we eat is the result of pollination services from honeybees in particular, that also includes a lot of work, really more work being done by wild bees. So when a town begins to think about how do we welcome these pollinators and what kinds of protections might we need to make sure that they will be maintained in a safe and healthy way, you are really helping in a tremendous way to rebuild a lost habitat for these pollinators. So a commitment to letting people raise bees and keep bees is one thing, but it's wonderful if it's also supported by planting some of the public spaces or allowing roadsides to have wildflowers and stuff to generate more extensive habitat and sources of nectar and pollen, which is all that bees of every kind eat. There are 20,000 species of bees in the world. 4,000 species of bees live in North America, and we have documented over 103 species of bee on the farm and in the park, in the Rockefeller Park around us. And I would imagine that Ossining would be equally rich in those pollinators and could be richer with a little encouragement. So the big question is, you know, the fear factor of people towards stinging insects, and there's a lot of confusion between wasps and bees. People think a yellow jacket nest is a beehive, and we get dozens of calls every year in the late summer about, I've got bees in my, you know, and they're wasps. Bees that come out of the ground are wasps. Stuff like that. So there's some public education is useful, and getting people excited about pollinators is also something that could happen in a town. I think that the convent has kept bees now for quite a while. I think Dan helped them get started, and they've done well as far as I know. And the other thing is there's a responsibility for beekeepers in suburban areas that are tightly packed to figure out, as well as they can, effective ways to catch swarms, and better yet, to prevent them from happening. And a swarm is what happens in the spring when a colony of bees is robust, especially in its like second year of existence. As early as April and going into July, those bees that are healthy and strong are going to want to reproduce. And so the old queen leaves the hive with like 60% of all the bees in there and takes off and makes a big cloud of bees that lasts a few minutes, and they settle on a place. And people often call that collection of bees that settles on a tree branch or a fence post the swarm. But it is a bunch of bees that have swarmed, but that little bunch of bees that's about to try to find a new home, a new cavity to live in, is actually called a bivouac. So those are a little bit of a challenge in tight suburban areas, because since honeybees live in cavities, they like to find one, and sometimes it's in somebody's house. Like if there's an opening or a piece of damage in the woodwork, they'll go in and, you know, fill a space in a wall or under a roof. And there are lots of people, and I can help provide you with at least one name, but there are probably lots of people who are insured and can come and remove bees that end up in the wrong place. They shouldn't be considered threatening. They're perhaps a nuisance, and you don't want them living inside a wall or something like that. But it'd be fine if they landed in somebody's dead tree and hollow tree and lived there. And they would be enjoyable to watch and study. So in terms of the PR aspect of beekeeping, I think that, you know, making sure that there's good swarm management, making sure that you have some contacts for bee removal, doing a little education and sort of getting people excited about the idea. And also beekeepers need to try to make sure they have a good source of water year round, even in the winter, for bees. because people with a swimming pool sometimes get very aggravated to find honeybees sipping water off the flagstones around the pool. So you can't always prevent that. You can try to, move the bees, but having a water source nearby is the best prevention. So those are the sort of domestic issues for a town that I think are pressing. I think you said it was the mayor who was speaking first.
Mm-hmm.
She also mentioned, properties that are small and have immediate street access, and there are some challenges in that setting for beekeeping. And some of those can be met. Again, it seems to me if you want to be a beekeeper, you have to have plantings to help support them and entice them. And it's the fun of also observing all those insects on those flowers. But there are ways to, in cases of close proximity of properties, to establish a little barrier in front of the entrance of a hive that helps the bees fly out and fly up instead of fly out of the hive and fly straight across. So I see you have some ideas about that. I'm not sure they're yet the best ones, but I think that those, in the event of tight quarters or stuff like that, there are things you can do. I wouldn't say every hive needs to have that.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all that very interesting
Sorry, that was a
information.
big windbaggy speech.
No, that's fine. And then next up, we have Karen Sabbath from the Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, it's my pleasure. Good evening, everybody. So I am a beekeeper. I've been doing this for about 12 years, and I've been a master beekeeper for the last 3, which is very exciting. And I learned from fabulous people at the Dice Lab at Cornell. And I do have some pretty strong opinions about what has been proposed here. But what I thought would be helpful, just from a sort of a higher level view, a bird's eye view or a bee's eye view when they're in flight, is that I think what matters is the philosophy. So what are you trying to do in this law? And I think you're trying to enable beekeeping, but you're for the people in the citizens. But it needs to also take into account what is to the benefit of the bees themselves, and what and it can and should address reasonable concerns of citizens. But I think to Maggie's point and Victoria, that have already been mentioned, is there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinformation. People are afraid of wasps, and I am too. And there's a huge difference in the experience if someone were to be stung by so a yellow jacket or a wasp can sting unlimited times, and it's very painful and very horrible. And that's when people go on picnics and they say, I don't want to be around the bees. Well, those aren't bees, those are wasps and yellow jackets. And people have really bad experience, some very bad experience with them. That's not the case for honeybees. And people need to, I think it's really important to write a bee law that isn't written because in response to some misinformed concerns, but rather to really be written for the benefit of the bees themselves. And I think the idea of encouraging best practices is excellent. But saying that and then putting restrictions that aren't best practices in the law is an unfortunate mix. So I think that, for example, there's nothing in there that says, or there's something in there that says, if you're not going to be at your hives every week, you have to have a contact person who is going to be there every week. Well, you know what? It's not in the bee's best interest to bother them every week and to open the hives and to do an inspection. And as a beekeeper, you need to know when and how often you need to inspect the hives, and at different times of year, different frequencies and different intervals between visits are the appropriate ones. And so to be very specific about it, I think is unfortunate and misguided. I do think that there are people who, who could benefit from, everyone can benefit, we can all benefit from learning more and being a better beekeeper. And I'm still learning, and I'm learning tons every time, every season, and from other people, and even from the bees. The bees teach me so much all the time. So it's a continuous learning process, and there is a series of, there are best practices. But for example, what if a neighbor sprays pesticide on their lawn, and I'm a beekeeper next door? That's not in the law anywhere that I should receive notice about it, or that there is a general education to the community that, by the way, spraying pesticides is not good for you, the sprayer, and insect populations and ecosystems. That's a huge problem for bees. And so I think it's important that if you're going to write the law should be written with the intention of protecting the bees as much as it is what's clearly come out in this current draft is theoretically to address questions with people who have concerns, many of which I think are unfounded concerns. And so, I'm happy to, at whatever appropriate time, and I think I did share some of my specific thoughts earlier, I think with Valerie, but the idea that, if you need some specific comments, that's fine. But I think just overall, philosophically, what are you trying to do? Trying to make the environment great for bees and reasonable concerns, responding to reasonable concerns of citizens. Those are great. And I think, but how it's being done, it does matter. It does make a difference.
Fantastic. Thank you for that great information. And now, wait, so you don't have to check on the hives every week, Fernando? You've been telling me you have to go check on your hives every week. What the heck? Why isn't that why you've been taking?
Is he trying to get out of meetings?
Joking. Okay, next
daily.
up,
I meant daily. You have to go daily. Next up, we have our assessor of town of Austin assessor, Fernando Gonzalez, who has been, as I've already showed everybody, but if you just tuned in, he deposited this on my desk today. I think he had, there was a reason. I'm not going to say why. No, I'm just joking. He is has been sort of our perspective. Let's just say perspective, right? This is somebody who deals with property values and looking at, a different perspective, and he also understands what goes into beekeeping. So we appreciate his perspective. And Fernando, if you just want to introduce yourself and say what your experiences have been with beekeeping. You have already talked to the town board a little bit about this, but just would love to hear what you have to say this evening.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me again. Beekeeping is a passion you start, and it totally takes you. I've been doing it for about 6 years, and I still consider myself a novice. And there is so much to learn, and I wish I had more time to do more things, but I limit my number of colonies to what I can handle, with the time I want to spend on it. But pretty much I agree with everything that Maggie Schwed and Karen Sabbath has said. If we propose a law that it's good for the bees or create an environment that is good for the bees, believe me, it's going to be a much healthier environment for everyone. And I promise you that as the assessor, I will not tax honeybees or colonies. And if they were to be taxed, I would have to use the income approach to value and assign an income approach to value for every frame. And the beekeepers in the panel here, we probably would not agree on a price per pound of honey. But I think it would be, it's a great experience for everybody in the family. My family has been very involved. My daughter particularly, unfortunately, she moved to Texas a few years ago, but now my 5-year-old accompanies me on some of the inspections.
Grandchild.
Initially, I must confess that I was so much into it in the beginning that I wanted to go see them every week and look at the queen and see the progress. And I did more inspections in the beginning, but then I realized that the best thing for the bees is to leave them alone as much as possible. And then you limited the inspections to just to make sure that they were okay, you know, that everything was normal in the hives. You know, sometimes you didn't even have to open. It's very invasive, you know. Imagine if someone came to your house and pulled your roof off and moved your bed around and your food, you know, your pantry from one end to the other, you know, that's very invasive. So, but in any case, it's a great experience. It will create a much better environment. Of course, where I have the bees is a very rural area. I do plant crops for them. I plant usually buckwheat, not only for them, but for the deers. So it's a dual purpose. I plant food lot for the deers, and I plant buckwheat, which deers love to eat, and honeybees love the flowers of the buckwheat. But I agree with everything that has been said. I think it's great for the community to have this available, especially the children. If we can teach the children at an early age the difference between a honeybee and a yellow jacket, that's a great thing. Most people think that the bees we're talking about are the ones that bother you during a picnic, and that's not so. There are concerns, and I think if there's more community awareness, there would be less use of pesticides, because that's not good for the bees. I had instances where my colonies died unexpectedly. A very healthy colony going in, you know, after I harvested the honey, and my only decision, or I thought that maybe what happened was that I have bees in an area where there are some farms nearby, and I thought maybe this year the farmers sprayed some pesticide and my colony got infected, because all of a sudden I went from a very strong colony that I harvested, you know, 75, 80 pounds of 100 pounds of honey on each colony, to when I went to check them to make sure they were okay for the winters, they were dead. And unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to send a sample for testing, but you know, it's very disappointing to have that experience. And of course, in this area where we live, I live in Rockland County, and you know, I do get the notices from the neighbors, you know, the pesticide company that sprays during the summer. I think once a month they're putting herbicides or some sort of, you know, to supposedly have a green lawn, you know. And on the other hand, my approach is different. In the spring, I do not cut my lawn, which is about 4 or 5 acres around the house, until all the dandelions are almost gone, to give an opportunity for the bees to have the first, to have that available to them. So, you know, it is definitely a much healthier environment if you do have bees that are doing well and that are surviving, you know, and if the people learn to appreciate that, it will make things a lot better. I do agree that probably the most visible time where people may be concerned about the bees is during the spring when they swarm. Sometimes in hot weather, they come out and they hang out in front, you know, like all of us hanging out on the deck when it's 95 degrees, they do the same thing. And that may, you know, if you're too close. My first hive, by the way, I had them about 50 yards from my house, so I could observe them closely without having to you know, making it convenient for me. But after a few years, I learned, and I put them in an area where they would be suffering from, less likely to suffer from disturbances from us, you know, running around in, you know, 4-wheelers and tractors, etc. So in a suburban environment as this, having that barrier in front to make sure that when they fly in and out, as Ms. Maggie Schwed mentioned, is very desirable, so that they do not fly, let's say, in front of the neighbor's deck, or you know, the flyway is not intruding in somebody. And the other idea, of course, is to have a source of water all the time. It's very healthy. It doesn't have to be a pool. It's just a bucket, you know, with a safe device so that the bees do not drown in it, you know. So there are devices out there that people can buy to provide for water. So
Thank you so much, Fernando. We have two more people, and I think that the next two kind of answer a little bit of the question of, why did you want to introduce beekeeping legislation? And the truth is, because we found out that we had some beekeepers in the town of Ossining who had some hives, colonies, apiaries, and while it isn't currently legal to do so, we thought we don't want to see the bees die. In fact, we want to see them thrive. And how can we make this something that is in fact legal in the town, but also find a way to balance the desires of those who are keeping bees with those who may find them to be a nuisance. So we don't know if they can be a nuisance. We've heard now from, you know, obviously from a few people that they can't be. Earlier in our public process, we've had, you know, a few meetings, as Valerie Monastra indicated, on this topic already. And we did hear from some of our neighbors about the possibility of outcompeting native pollinators, and also the you know, issue of, well, I don't necessarily want to have bees, but I have all the flowers on my property. So does that mean all the bees are going to come over to my property? And if all the bees come over my property, maybe that will be a nuisance to my property. So these are some of the things that we're trying to figure out how we can balance. And also, what if I do decide that I want to keep bees and my neighbor wants to keep bees too? Is that, and the best place to keep bees happens to be right on near our property line. Is that going to be a problem? So these are some of the things that we're grappling with, and some of the reasons that we asked you here. But the next two guests that we have here tonight are beekeepers on properties here in town of Ossining, and we would like to hear a little bit from them, because we understand that they have been keeping bees, and granted, it's not yet legal, but we want to know what the experience has been here in the town. And you know, I don't know, I think I did check with our or maybe I don't know if I checked about bees, but I don't think that we know of any complaints that we've received so far about beekeeping in the town. So I just put that out there. But next up, we have John Gallagher Jr., beekeeper at St. Augustine's Church, who recently did host our building inspector. We don't have that. Do we have that picture, Victoria? We got to show that picture. Okay, we don't have the picture, but we do have seen that he had a great lesson, and he was very appreciative. John, can you talk a little bit about beekeeping at St. Augustine's?
Hello, I'm John Gallagher, and I'm the beekeeper at St. Augustine School in Ossining. I'm also a teacher there. I'm the school music teacher. I also help manage the hives at Mariandale, and I assist Sister Betty Ann Jaster. And I've been keeping bees for almost 10 years. And at St. Augustine, I'll just talk about St. Augustine and Mariandale too, because they both have, places have a lot of property and a lot of space. St. Augustine, I think we have almost 20 acres. We have a lot of space there. And at St. Augustine's School, we currently have 13 hives that I manage. At Mariandale, I help Sister manage 3 hives there. And I also have 9 hives on my property. I don't live in Ossining, I live in Cortland Manor. And I'm just going to throw some things out there, because I'm not really quite sure what direction we're going in. So just to throw a few things out there, and maybe we can discuss them. At St. Augustine School, they're placed behind the rectory where the priests live. So they're all the way at the bottom of the hill, and they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it's a really nice place to have the apiary, because the bees don't really bother anybody. And you wouldn't even know that all 13 hives are down there unless you walk to the bottom of the hill. A lot of people that don't do beekeeping and that aren't beekeepers, they think that bees are dangerous, like wasps and hornets, like I heard some people mention before. But honeybees are actually very gentle. And the only time they would really ever want to sting somebody is to defend their hive. So for example, if you got too close to a hive, okay, maybe they might, try to sting you. And lots of times before they even sting you, they would do a few, I guess you would call them like flybys to warn you. Things like that. So maybe an issue that you might want to discuss is the placement of hives on your property. So depending on how big your lot is or what the size or shape of your lot is, maybe that might be something that you would like to discuss. Even the direction of a hive. So for example, if you place the front of a beehive, for example, because there are several students in the school that help me, and they want to learn about bees and beekeeping. And you should never approach a beehive directly from the front. That's called the bee line, kind of like the buses, the bee line buses. And that disturbs the bees because they're busy flying in and out. So if you ever work a hive or inspect a hive, you should do it from the side or sometimes even from the back. So while the bees are busy going back and forth, you're not disturbing them and getting in their way because that, bothers them. So that would probably be helpful for people to know where, if you have a piece of property and you're interested in having bees, maybe not placing it on the property line, or maybe being careful what direction the hive is placed because you don't want them flying directly onto your neighbor's property while they're sitting down trying to enjoy, the outside or having a barbecue or having some, kind of get together or family party. And the bees are flying back and forth and, bothering people. So you might want to think about that. If you ask 10 different beekeepers a question, you might get 10 different answers. But as somebody mentioned before, there are overarching principles in beekeeping that are always true. Okay, and styles differ, and we all do things different ways. But certain things are just, true and cover all aspects of beekeeping. So I think that, we should first and foremost discuss things like that. My lot of my house, for example, I live in Cortland Manor, like I said, and it's just a regular lot. I think it's like a half an acre. And my neighbors don't even really know that I even have beehives on my property until I knock on their door and I give them honey. And because I made sure to place them in a spot where they don't disturb anybody. And even me and my family, I have 4 children, and no one ever gets stung. Nobody, ever gets, chased by bees or anything like that. If you place them well and and you're really thoughtful about it, and, you just don't haphazardly do things. I mean, bees and people can coexist wonderfully. I think that's about it. I hope that was helpful.
Sure. Absolutely.
And yeah, thank you for letting me speak.
And thank you so much for taking the time to do so. We appreciate
You're welcome.
it. Okay, and next up we have Margaret, and I'm going to let you say your own last name, who's the beekeeper at Bethany Arts Community. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Margaret, and I have been tending to bees in Bethany's for a while now. Bethany is, well, first I should say how I love all the beekeepers, what they have to say, because I think it's understood that we are all out for the best of the bees, period. That most hobby beekeepers, I would say, I would hope, are not not in beekeeping for honey, but really for the greater good for the bees. And I've been beekeeping now for 24 years. So it's been a long curve, seeing when the bees didn't have trouble, sees when bees really existed for 5 years in the same area without any issues. This is before Varroa mite even arrived. I'm recently, for the last 3 years, being a part of an international group called Learning from the Bees, also called Preservation Beekeeping from England. And its purpose is really run by Tom Seeley, partly from Cornell. And it is really what somebody else mentioned before, is how do we ensure the health of the native bees, that we don't just look at honeybees who are not native to America. They came here in the Middle Ages, but to really ensure that we don't forget about our native bees. So I totally am in favor of looking at food in general. And at Bethany, since we started bees, when the first colonies arrived at Bethany, there was already an orchard in place. So it made sense. An orchard absolutely benefits hugely from honeybees. And then gardens were planted. So the honeybees do not take room from the native species, which was very important. And we have currently 8 hives. 2 of them are in the woods. They're not even seen. And it's kind of an experiment to treat them as wild bees, because our bees' resistance has gone way down. And part of natural preservation beekeeping is, and Tom Seeley's work is, to return the bees, part of the bees, into the wild, into the trees, called tree beekeeping, where you do not treat them, you do not take honey, and you just let them be themselves, and they're remarkably resistant. So it's a wonderful place at Bethany, because it really makes sense of a community, because Bethany is a community place. I haven't heard any complaints. It's out of the way of the path. It's facing in a direction where nobody walks by. We have to face east, so we're that's where you place the hives. So all it's been well, and there's enough food, because Bethany has 28 acres. In general, if we are thinking about how to make a law, I just want to add something that was tabled years ago when the village of Ossining was looking at bees. And I just for fun back then, I looked up at laws of the 1800s. And there was a law in the 1800s, this is from Germany, where it says, if there is a swarm landing in your neighbor's yard, you have 1 hour to retrieve it, otherwise it belongs to the neighbor. So it's just a perspective, the
That's great.
perspective.
Uh-oh, we lost Margaret. Okay, Margaret, we lost you. Okay, so perspective. Hopefully you'll come back to us soon. Do we have you back, Margaret? No? People are moving a little bit more. Okay, I think we still lost you. Are you there? Your box is lit up. I have hope. Okay, anyhow, that is great, and thank you for that perspective. Oh, we're getting you back.
I'm
Um,
sorry, I was frozen. Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we had a lot, you have all offered us already, I think, some answers to our questions. I'm not exactly sure, Valerie, if you had a suggestion about how to do this. We were already taking up an awful lot of time hearing from everybody. Can you guys hear me? Okay, which is great because, again, it was so great to hear so many different perspectives, what sort of overlaps there were. Some of the questions that we had that have come up, which is, you know, we'd written something into the code that would have said, you know, if a nuisance situation arises, you know, you have to deal with it. So how would our building inspector determine what's a nuisance? Like, how do you enforce what is a nuisance? I'm going to just go through all these questions, and then Valerie, I'm going to ask you to moderate. Okay. There was concern about how an untrained building inspector would know what a nuisance is if the property owner is abiding by all the regulations, especially more subjective ones, such as, is there enough food or water? Like, how do you know? How does one building inspector who doesn't know anything about bees know? And one of the things he had suggested is that that if something came up, that the beekeeper would have to pay to have an expert come in and make these sort of determinations. And I think that was something that we were considering. I know that he's had some little training now, our building inspector, so maybe he feels like he is an expert. He isn't able to join us this evening, but he said, John, he's in good hands. John knows everything. Whatever John says goes. And he was very happy to have that experience with you, John. So thank you again for that. Also, so the question is, does anybody have thoughts on the enforcement issue? And the other question is really about the number of hives and the proximity to other properties, which a lot of you have spoken generally about, but not maybe specifically. And we were trying to come up with limits to what is too many hives, and sort of to the point that I had mentioned before, which is, you know, if you have a neighbor who has like the most incredible garden with the best food for bees, but doesn't necessarily want all and only honeybees on her or his property, what would you know, how do you mitigate against that if there is such a way, or is it not an issue? And then, you know, should there be a maximum number of hives that we should allow no matter how big a property is, or should it be based on the size of the property? Those are kind of the main questions. And then I think I talked about, right, how far apart might you want these hives to be. So Valerie, I'm going to let you figure this out.
Well, I think it might just be easiest if people have very specific thoughts on these issues. Everyone did receive the local law ahead of time. I know in general, based on some of the discussions that I've had, that I think, and I'll let the beekeepers speak for themselves, but a lot of them feel that, you know, we can remove a lot of those restrictions. And so, and I'm getting heads nodding.
Okay.
but a lot of these restrictions were put in place based upon initial, you know, comments we received from the public, as well as concerns just in general about, you know, how much is too much within the town of Ossining. So why don't I just kind of open it up and you know, the panelists can take it from there.
But just to be clear, the panelists, we're talking about our panelists.
Yes, panelists,
conversation.
yes.
So, okay, so let's go, and I would love to hear first from the beekeepers, and then we can go to our other panelists. Okay, so beekeepers, do you want to weigh in on any of these? And you could just raise your hand like this, and then we'll, you know, you can speak. Whichever one of you wants to go first. Oh, John, go ahead, John.
I think maybe one thing to think about is, or maybe a term that, you know, I'm going to use is that maybe a hive, if somebody is interested in starting beekeeping or putting a hive on their property, it should be thoughtfully placed. And what I mean by that is as to not disturb, you know, your neighbors and the surrounding people, okay, people either next to you or behind you or whatever. Bees, for example, don't like to fly through trees and bushes and stuff like that. So for example, my property at my house has like a hedgerow, with lots of trees and thickets and stuff. And so bees don't really fly through that. So that might be something to take into consideration.
Okay, great. Okay, so thoughtfully placed, if that's a term.
Karen seems to have her hand up.
Karen, go ahead, Karen.
I do like that. I love the way that sounds, thoughtfully placed. And I was also going to say that when people ask me if, tell me that they want to keep bees, they say, where should I place my hive? I said, well, first of all, I highly recommend that you have 2 hives. That it is very helpful for beekeepers to have 2 hives, because if something goes wrong in one hive, you have resources right next door in your own property. You know the beekeeping practices that you've been using, and you may need to take some eggs, a frame of eggs, and developing bees from one hive to strengthen the other hive. So I think, to be honest, recommending, so I'm not suggesting that you can't have one hive, but best beekeeping practices, a companion hive, having 2 hives so you have your own resources that about is very, very helpful. And I will be honest, my experience, I keep hives in 6 different locations of all different size properties. And it's not the size of the total homeowner or business's property that dictates how many hives should be in each location. It is literally the environment. And I will say to somebody, this property is a very hospitable environment for bees. And that's because I've had 2 or 3 hives there, and they've made it through the winter. They get them, they have enough resources for themselves, and they are able to stay healthy. And then there's another property that's larger, where I can't have 3 hives. I just know I've had experience there where there's just not enough and doesn't mean on the property, but in the 3 mile or 5 mile radius of where the bees are, there's not enough to support having more than 2 hives at this location. So I'm sorry that, it's not, I don't believe there is there's a good hard and fast rule, because it's very specific to the environment. And I think it's a mistake to say that there is a minimum or a maximum. And I mean, ultimately, I guess I don't want to lose this one thought, which is, if you don't mind, is that if someone is a beekeeper, it's not like it costs $5 to be a beekeeper. There is an investment of some amount of money, but it's also a huge investment of time and your heart and soul. And I'm sure that there are some beekeepers who couldn't care less, but the beekeepers you're talking about are not, I don't believe we'll put 8 hives and then lose all of them, in a property, right? So they're going to want to put 2 and maybe split one to be a third to prevent swarming and keep the hives healthy. And they're going to find that works. And then the next year they're like, okay, that's great. Maybe I'll try 4, or maybe I will give my excess bees to another beekeeper at another property, because they get to know the property where they are. So I just don't think there is this, and I know I'm sounding very naive, because I'm sure there are some people who won't have that philosophy, but your heart and soul isn't and I don't think that people are just going to put willy-nilly, invest another couple $100 in hive boxes and all that physical energy and mental energy to just see their hives be doomed, because that's what will happen.
Margaret?
Maggie,
sorry.
You're muted.
Oh, is it Maggie or Margaret?
This is Maggie.
Maggie, sorry.
Hi. I think the question of numbers of hives on a site is very much related to the amount of forage available. But again, in a tight suburban setting where lots are close to each other, if there are ways to deal with this, but they're advanced. Bees tend to proliferate you know, you start with, I agree, you should at least have 2 hives for the basic reason that was explained, that if one hive is faltering, you have a ready source of trying to see if you can coax it ahead. And you know exactly what's been done in those colonies. It gives you a basis for comparison. It's educational, and it works better. But there are some risks of bees proliferating a lot. I mean, when I use, when I'm working in my apiaries, I do split my colonies pretty regularly, once, sometimes twice, occasionally 3 times. And when I do that, I'm creating something called a nucleus hive, which is like 5 frames of bees. And that's like a little half a colony starting up. And then I use those as a kind of piggy bank of bees. If I need a new queen, I can take one from my nuke. If I need more eggs, I can take it from my nuke. If that colony is small and weak, I can put the whole nuke into it. But so if you had a rule that said no property of X number of feet could have more than 3 colonies, you would be preventing something that is very much a part of beekeeping, which would be these use of nukes. And at the same time, you don't necessarily want someone in a very small cheek by jowl plot without great forage to be popping 10 colonies in there, and next year 15. So I'm not sure how you deal with it, but you have to be flexible enough, and at the same time, flexible enough to allow there to be the kind of growth that lets the beekeeper serve the health of the bees and keep them going. And at the same time, not necessarily encouraging just, you know, enormous numbers of bees, which in a forage starved area can put a lot of pressure on things. My other slight concern is Varroa treatments. And again, I don't know that you can put that in your town laws, but in a suburban setting, if you have some people who are not treating their bees, there is a very good chance that these Varroa mites, which are the #1 pest and parasite on our Western honeybees, will really get out of control. And one beekeeper could be doing everything right to keep those pests at a low level, and somebody else who doesn't know how to treat or hasn't got the equipment or thinks that's just too hard can be really infecting the bees in that 3 to 5 mile radius. 5 is the outer limit of how far bees can travel, but 1 to 3 miles is very common. So in a small town, that's the town. So I have some concern about, you know, when we talk about, look, people who keep honeybees have to be very fundamentally concerned with supporting bee health. Varroa treatment is part of that picture. Unhappily, in a more rural setting, if you knew that you were really distant from other beekeepers, I think you can be very successful in making those live or let die experiments with not having untreated bees. But it is kind of a tricky thing in a suburban setting. I just wanted to say that. And this is another thing slightly to the side of your main question here, but you asked, your rules suggest that all the entrances have to be turned in toward the house, and that is not a sensible regulation. The best place to have bee entrances, as was mentioned, is facing the east or southeast, so that they get lots of light and are out foraging early and get that morning warmth to warm up the colony. So there's some things that just don't make sense in the regs about how bees work and stuff.
Dina, I'm going to need to go. Can I just chime in before?
Yeah,
So I'm not a beekeeper, but because we've had all these conversations and we've seen how it's played out in the village, I just want to give my perspective from the way that the types of things that we try to consider when we do local legislation. And I think when John said, you really want to be thoughtful about the placement, I think that the thing to understand is that beekeepers are generally a very self-selecting group that is passionate about what they're doing, as you can see tonight. And they talk to other master beekeepers and they get mentors and they get trained. And that was really what we, that if there's one requirement that we have in the village law, if you read the apiary registration, you sign an agreement saying that you basically you list all of your training and your associations, and then you sign an agreement saying that you've read the local law and that you've read the recommended best practices from whatever the resources are, and that's it. You tell us where your hive is, you tell us your contact information. And so if there were ever an issue of enforcement and somebody weren't doing that, then that would be okay, we'll fill out this thing. But it really sets the tone very clearly, and trying to say the opening needs to face here or not face here, all you're doing is limiting the proper placement for something, because no best practice is going to say have the opening where children are going to be walking home from school and the bees are going to sting them. I mean, that's not best practices. So like, I think some of the suggestions that are very specific in the law are trying to solve for problems that are not problems, because they're already solved for by beekeepers having best practices. And then the one other thing I would say is, we on the village website, again, if you go and you just search beekeeping, you'll find we have a list of resources, and it includes Karen, your group is on there, and some of the other local groups. So if people had questions about bees, or wanted to learn about it, or were concerned because their neighbors had them or they'd heard about it, or if there was a problem and they needed to get resources, they can get them there. But the beekeepers themselves are going to have all of those resources, because they just are. Like Karen said, it's not something you go into lightly. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of expense, it's a lot of time, and frankly, you've probably spent more time talking about this than there are. Like, you already have 2 beekeepers in Ossining, and you're going to get 3 more in the whole town once you pass this. It's not something that like thousands of people are going to do. I mean, I know it's something that's gotten a lot more attention in the last several years, but it's a big commitment. Most people are not going to undertake it. Mm-hmm. So I think, I hope that you come to a conclusion that you can create some sort of formal structure in the town, mm-hmm. Without, creating obstacles to safe, responsible beekeeping, because the reality is that's what you're going to get. You're going to get safe, responsible beekeeping. That's all we've gotten in the village of Ossining.
Thank you. Okay, so Maggie, can we give Margaret a chance, because she had her hand up too, and we would like to wrap this up and give the board a chance to ask some questions. So Margaret, go ahead, and then we'll figure out where we go next.
The only thing I wanted to add, which I think the village of Ossining,
thanks, Mayor,
is already written down, mm-hmm. is that when a brand new beekeeper says, I want to have 5 hives in my 1 acre lot, is to ensure he or she has already done a course in beekeeping.
Yes.
To not start brand new, jumping in and then learning the hard way, because it is, like Maggie said, the Varroa is here to stay, and if one person treats and the other one doesn't, we have a problem. So, and that's a tricky law, which, by the way, has been in Europe for years and years, that you cannot have a beehive until you have a certificate of beekeeping courses.
Right.
But Ossining could even say, when you start your beehive, maybe please make sure that you join a local beekeeping group. So they're not just out there by themselves, which most likely they wouldn't be anyhow. So right. That's all.
Okay, Maggie, if it's something short, you have something short, or is that? No, you're good? Okay. Okay, so Valerie, are you good? Fernando, you're okay with not saying anything else until we have some questions? Can I open it up to the board for questions, please? Now, you've heard an awful lot, and I'm guessing that some of you do have questions. No? You guys are ready?
It was a lot of information I think I need to process. But there were some good points made, and thank you all for educating us, because I actually learned a lot today. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, great. It was a lot of information. I mean, it's starting to sound like the less legislation we do, the better it is for the bees, and the more education we do for our population about bees, the better it would be for all of us, including the pesticides and everything else. But that doesn't really get me to where I have a common sense beekeeping law, so I'm gonna have to process as well.
If I may say something, thank you, Liz, for saying that, because I tend to agree with you about that. Like everybody has been saying tonight, there's a way that we should do beekeeping. The hive should face this way, and you should have 2 hives, and you should treat your bees, and you should belong to a club. And all of this makes sense. And I can't see how anybody would disagree with that. But sometimes practical matters get in the way. So for example, just say, a hive should be facing a certain direction. But as somebody mentioned before, children are walking to school and it faces a sidewalk. Well, then you might not want to do that. And so as Liz said, sometimes, you got to go, and you can't do it that way, even though technically by the book, you should do it that way. So sometimes practicality takes precedence over these issues.
Which is why your suggestion of thoughtfully placed, I think,
Exactly.
makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
And I like that. I like that idea for that language. I just hope then, a lot of times then we get, well, what is the definition of thoughtfully?
Well, you know what? I'm sorry if I may interrupt you, because you just jogged my memory. One of my neighbors is not affected by bees because there's a tree line. But one of my neighbors sometimes is, because there's not a tree line on the other side of my house. So whenever I open up my hives and I inspect them, I let my neighbor know. So I call him up, I'll knock on his door, and I'll say, hey, by the way, I'm going to be opening up my hives today. And when you open up the hives, the bees are flying all over the place sometimes, and it gets slightly crazy. So nothing has happened before. But just to stay safe, I like to let him know, because I don't want him to panic. I don't want people to, feel like they're going to get hurt or whatever. And so just to be a nice neighbor, I let him know that I will be opening up my hives today, and I'm going to be inspecting, and I just wanted to let you know. So, that's something else to think about. We're just letting your neighbors know, hey, I have beehives, and, I'm going to be, inspecting my hives today and opening them up, and I just wanted you to know. So just being like a thoughtful neighbor too.
Sure.
And also there are concerns too, fire concerns and safety concerns with smokers, because when you open up a hive, you need to often smoke your bees. And the smokers that the beekeepers use to puff smoke on the bees, that calms them down. So the training is a good thing, because you can easily start a fire. If sparks, fly out and, they catch on to leaves and stuff like that, because novice beekeepers might not know this, or you'll put down your smoker and it's very hot, and you can start a fire. And so I think that's why training is so important, as Margaret said, to join a club and to know how to properly use your equipment.
Thank you. I don't know about you, but after hearing all these horrible things from the Varroa mites to the fires, nobody's an Austin. No, I was just joking. But there are some things some points that you've all raised that do, I think, raise a few eyebrows, I'm going to say. And I don't know that any of you have dealt with our neighbor who has the best garden ever and doesn't necessarily want the honeybees on her neighbor's property to be coming over to hers all the day long. I don't know if anybody's actually come up with a solution for that one. And, maybe we just get lucky and find out that there aren't bees that are on that neighboring property, but what if there are?
I would say that neighbor would have the best garden with some bees nearby. And I think if that gardener had just a little more education, which I'm sure that person already does, but with a little extra education about how bees can even increase the pollination and the beauty of her garden or his or her garden. I think that that is just an unnecessary, unfortunate, sorry for your situation, but it's an absurd situation that she brings up.
I'm with you.
I totally agree.
I feel exactly that way. And I feel like the town has this beautiful opportunity to really promote what pollinators can do for everybody. And if there's any room in that budget at all, to get busy with some plantings, thinking about what's good in the beginning of the season, what's great at the end to help support them. And it's not just for the honeybees. That's really, really important. It's the whole picture of pollinators. And, you know, I'm happy to help make planting suggestions. I'm sure there are master gardeners and lots of people who can help, but it's a whole picture. It's a whole picture of trying to restore some natural habitat, and it gives people such opportunities also to observe this beautiful, myriad, complicated insect life. It's fun. It's not scary to have a beautiful garden visited by lots of gorgeous insects. It's really not scary.
Oh, I don't
I
think
spend my time.
I do not
with
think this
my-
person is scared, and they are a master gardener. Okay, so let's move on
Oh,
now.
yeah, good.
I have one more
Great.
question.
Go ahead. Yes, that's what I was going to say. The board, if you have any more questions, go ahead.
All right, so I'm just picturing some of our more interesting residents saying, I thought very carefully about the placement. Not that it was a thoughtful placement as far as bees go, but I thought about it and I put it here. You know, but anyway, I agree with an education requirement. I think that's our best practice, to have them at least having it a beekeeping course, education requirement. I'd like to understand what the minimum these professionals think would be the thing to have them have before they can get a hive of their own.
I see our council is biting her tongue. Christy
Yeah.
Tamadana, did you want to say something? Because, you know, no? You look like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was biting my tongue. I was just sitting.
Oh, okay.
I understand all the practicalities of what everyone is saying, and I can't presume to have even, an iota of the knowledge that everyone here tonight does. It's just hard to legislate like that when you're trying to codify rules and regulations that can apply to everyone, and the rules are basically nothing can apply to everyone. It makes it a little bit challenging. So I think an education requirement is certainly something that the board can consider. You could also think about having, we talked about this before in the context of the tree warden that we have. We have a plethora of people right here who may be willing to do it for the town, but maybe when these applications, if and when we get to that point, these applications come in, maybe we need to have someone look at it and just say, from your expert opinion, is this thoughtful placement? Does this environment seem conducive to X number of hives in these locations? And use that as a starting off point. I'm not a board member. I don't make these decisions, but just hearing everything that's been said tonight, it seems to be that those are the recommendations we're hearing. So that may be, I know there were concerns of the board, and as someone who doesn't know about bees, I had a lot of the thought processes that apparently only apply with respect to wasps and yellow jackets and whatnot. I think there's really no rush here. And, if the board has been going through this for a while, and I know we'd like to make progress, but I think after, this is just my suggestion, this has been a long night of talking about this, maybe some time to digest it and bring it back for a work session in a couple of weeks.
Sounds like a plan. I like it. Okay, are there any other questions from the town board? Or is there any other question from our planner, Valerie Menastra?
No, I would just suggest that maybe it might be best if we go back if this comes back to a work session for further discussion, and I can highlight the different sections that I think, really the panelists were referring to, that the board might want to consider changes to those various sections, and we can discuss it at a work session. I know it's currently in front of the board, and it's a current public hearing, but maybe the board might want to consider adjourning the public hearing, which was going to be on the 24th, I believe, so that we can bring it back to a work session, make revisions, and then bring it back to the public hearing again.
I think that sounds like a fabulous idea. Our board, would you like to just give a thumbs up if you agree? That sounds good.
Okay.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all so much for your thoughtfulness, your time, and your expertise, and we very, very much appreciate it. And we look forward to trying honey from each of these hives in the not too distant future. And thanks for your participation in our local government and our community here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And we will take it all under advisement.
Thank
we
you.
promise. Okay, so with that, I think I have lost my place. Okay. I think we had one little note of interest, and actually, is our friend from Stone Barns? Yes, still here, right? Just stand for 1 second. I'm not going to ask much of you, but just since you're here, we recently received a complaint from a resident who had been hearing a rooster on a property near Ryder Park. Currently, the town zoning code does not expressly disallow roosters. Many municipalities do ban roosters, including the village of Ossining, I will say, because of the nuisance that they cause. However, we are learning that roosters may be beneficial to home flocks for a variety of reasons, including protection from predators. There also may be ways to mitigate some of the nuisance caused by roosters. Since we are currently considering legislation to amend our zoning code chapter on animals, which is where the bee legislation would sit, it may make sense for the board to take up this topic at this time if it is of interest. Now, I will say that reaching out to our police department, we haven't had any complaints about roosters come to the police. We really haven't heard any complaints even from our building inspector about roosters. We do know that there are a couple roosters in town, except for this one complaint that we've received. There have not been any others. I'm not sure that it's worth taking up this legislation at this time, but I want to sort of put it out there at this moment for the board to consider. And Maggie, did you want to say anything about roosters before the board considers, just since we have you here?
Well, actually, I thought you just gave a quite good summary. The rooster can be annoying because they will start crowing in the summertime at 3:30, 4 in the morning. It's a sound I really like. So, I mean, I find it more intriguing than dogs barking, and dogs seem to bark all the time. I grew up in a small town and they barked all night long. So they are valuable to the flock, and they really do help it stay safe, and the hens behave better, they lay better, they have more opportunity to forage without constantly reacting to environmental threats. That rooster governs them pretty much. Every now and then a rooster gets above himself and the farmer will replace that rooster. But generally speaking, that just pertains to the yard, wherever they are. If someone hates roosters crowing, they're gonna complain because they're gonna crow.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to just turn it over to Councilwoman Feldman, because you had done some research on this, which is where we got some of this nice information that I shared. And also, I think you had something about how there's a way to mitigate the crowing by facing them a different way or something along those lines. So did you want to make a comment about if you think it's worth taking this up or not?
Well, I mean, resident that I call a resident that had a rooster in the past, and they said that if they keep them in a, you know, in the hen house with no light, they don't crow. And if you are a responsible neighbor, you don't let them out until 7 a.m. And as soon as they see the light, they start to crow. And that's how you're a good neighbor. And he also, much in the way John brought honey, he brought eggs to his neighbor, you know, every so often to say, hey, you know I have chickens next door, but not only are they getting the ticks around here, but here you go. He said he never had a problem. He said that there was, you want a certain number, you know, you don't want 2 roosters and not enough hens, that would be a problem. So I think he said something like 12 hens to a rooster. I don't know that anybody's going to have that many, have big a flock in the town.
I don't think we're there are limitations to the size, so.
Right. So, I mean, I guess 1 rooster would be reasonable to limit it to 1 rooster. I don't know that we need to, you know, we've had a lot of problem with it, but if we wanted to look into some common sense, you know, things, I guess we could.
I just wonder if it's worth our time, because we have 1 or 2 roosters in the town, and
I actually don't think it's worth our time at
yeah.
this point. I mean, it was interesting. Thank you for the information, Liz. I looked at the blog and it was really interesting, but I don't see that it's an issue or a big enough issue. And the person that complained doesn't necessarily live where they heard the rooster. So the neighbors around there weren't complaining about the rooster. I mean, I don't see it as a big enough issue for us to legislate it at this time.
And I don't even know that they heard the rooster early in the morning, that where it would be, you know, outside the noise codes, you know, or whatever.
Right.
So, you know, if the rooster was crowing at 3, 4, 5 in the morning and, you know, the residents were upset about it, I think that maybe we want to maybe at least have a conversation with them. Hey, did you know if the rooster was in a dark box and you let them out at a reasonable hour, your neighbors wouldn't hate you or something like that.
Okay, so
but I don't know that we need to add legislation at this time.
I'm kind of on the same page as you all. And Councilman Meyer, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think we should let's get through with bees, and then we can think about roosters.
Okay, great. And Councilman Welcher, are you good with leaving roosters lie? Is that a thing?
Listen, I was raised up on a farm in Georgia, and roosters crow at the break of day. That seemed to be their job. but when you get tired of them crowing, you wring their necks.
Oh, goodness gracious. Right? We do have some vegetarians, vegans here. All right. So there's ways to deal with these things, I suppose.
Well, I don't know what to say about that. I do know people that had a couple of chickens, but I didn't realize, never thought about the rooster because I never heard it.
Okay. So I think we'll let that be for a little while. Thank you all for your consideration. And with that, we are moving far away from lovely bees and roosters. And we're going to hear our budget presentation for our 2021 budget. Thanks so much, Maggie. Thanks everybody else who was joining us for this purpose. And on to our next topic, which is our 2021 budget presentation with our budget officer, Victoria Caffarelli. We've spent the past few months with our department heads and town board, led by our comptroller, Dale Brennan, our deputy comptroller, Liz Nakari, and our budget officer, Victoria Caffarelli, crafting our tentative budget for 2021. The tentative budget has been posted on the website for several weeks now for the public to view. We're very proud to present a budget going into 21 with tax rate decreases across all but one small sewer fund, and that is less than 1%, I think, increase, or less than a
1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, 1/10 of 1% increase. And we still are going to be maintaining a high level of service to all our town residents. As you know, the budget is a roadmap for serving the town. This has been a particularly challenging budget cycle due to the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic. but we are cautiously optimistic going into our next fiscal year that we will continue to be in good shape. We do have healthy fund balance, and we've been able to maintain our improved AA1 bond rating, which will also help us with our borrowing. We anticipate borrowing for a few large capital projects to take advantage of low rates, which we believe will go on into 2021. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Victoria now to take us through her presentation, which lays out in greater detail the proposed tentative budget for 2021. Victoria Caffarelli, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let me pull this up. Going. Okay, just had to pause on that. Okay, yes, so this is our presentation on the 2021 tentative budget, and we also have our comptroller and deputy comptroller on. So if there's anything that they feel like they need to interject, they certainly can. I welcome it. They're a huge part of this process, and definitely the brains behind the operation. Okay, so let's skip ahead. Why is this not doing what I want it to do? Hold on, sorry. It's not moving ahead. Okay, hold on one second. Let me try to get this thing to work for me.
Where'd everybody go?
Sorry, I'm trying to.
No, I'm laughing that we lost our entire public.
I know. Why is this not doing what?
But everybody stayed for the B legislation. That was lengthy.
That was lengthy. Okay.
That was lengthy.
Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna have to go through this a little differently. Sorry, it's not really cooperating with me as I would like. Okay. So we'll start at the top here again. So it's our budget presentation. I'm going to rewind a little bit and talk a little bit about the preparation process. So this budget is for our fiscal year 2021, which runs from January 1st through December 31st. The process started in September, late August, when department heads began putting in their requests for the 2021 year. And in keeping with some directives we had given to department heads earlier on this year, again, this is a budget season like no other. We had asked department heads during earlier in the pandemic in around March and April to halt non-essential spending, look for savings wherever possible because things were just so uncertain. So similarly, looking ahead to 2021, we asked department heads to do the same thing, look for savings whenever possible, make considerations knowing that we're going into a year with a lot of uncertainty and keep that in mind. And I think most of the department heads really did do an excellent job of making those decisions and are a big part of this process as well. The tentative budget was submitted to the town clerk on October 30th, or by October 30th. By law, we're required to do so. And also by law, we're required to adopt the budget by December 20th. Right now, we have it planned for our December 8th legislative session if all goes as planned. Okay. Our budget has multiple components, which is the town general portion, the unincorporated area, which includes our unincorporated fund and our highway fund. And then we also have special districts, including our townwide water fund, our sewer fund. You'll notice that we, in the past, have had a North State Road Sewer Fund, which actually dropped off in 2020. There was some outstanding indebtedness from before the Consolidated Sewer District was founded. So that is now dropping off this year. That payment has been made and that is done now. We also have our light, fire, and refuse districts, our ambulance district, and the Dale Cemetery, which is not a taxing district, but it is a fund in our budget. Okay, so looking ahead at how our taxes are distributed, I know this is a big question for a lot of people. What am I paying for in my various tax bills? So about 10%, between 10% and 12% goes to the county, our Westchester County taxes, which is also on the town bill that you receive in April. The town general, which includes residents of the town outside, the village of Ossining, and the village of Briarcliff, it's less than 3% of your tax bill. School districts really make up the larger portion of it, which is between 60 and 70% of your tax bill. And then the local municipality, which for people who live in the village of Ossining or village of Briarcliff is your village tax. People who live in the unincorporated town of Ossining, it appears on your town taxes as for the unincorporated and highway funds and the special districts. Okay, now to some highlights for this year's budget. Our proposed general fund expenditures is $5,723,803. The proposed expenditures for the unincorporated fund is $6,703,147. As Supervisor mentioned earlier, we are seeing tax rate decreases across all but one fund. Our sewer fund, again, has a less than 1/10 of 1% tax rate increase. And this is in large part due to the fact that our community-wide assessed value has increased by 4% from last year, which is really significant. And I think we owe a lot of thanks to our town assessor, Fernando Gonzalez, who not only brings us honey, but also does a really great job of making sure that we maintain our roll at 100% of market value, which really contributes to us being able to have a tax rate decrease for this year. Additionally, again, like I explained at the beginning, our department has really did a great job of making some tough decisions this year and looking at ways that they could have some savings, and that has included salary freezes for most of our non-union personnel, and in an effort to try to curb some of the spending and think long and hard about how we can be budget responsibly going into 2021. Okay, so now diving in a little bit more into the town general. So again, this is less than 3% of your tax bill. And what it covers is a whole bunch of things, including our town and village consolidated court, the supervisor's office, administration, the budget office, our grant administration, many of our environmental initiatives, the tax collection, tax assessment, our town clerk, our senior program, our senior nutrition program, all of our parks, our food scraps recycling program, and rent on some of the space that we occupy in some village-owned buildings, as well as our summer concert series and fireworks. I know we sort of had to sacrifice that this year, but that is also paid for out of your town general bill. Now to assign some sort of real dollar figures to give some perspective for everybody. So this year, the average assessed value for an Ossining home that receives a town general tax bill, so this is across the 3 jurisdictions, both villages and the unincorporated area, is $452,952. This has increased just like the general assessed value of our community. Last year, it was a little over $436,000 was the average assessment. So then applying the tax rate as it is now, the average tax bill for somebody who's paying into the town general fund is about $342. This has increased slightly by about $11 from last year. Last year was about $331. So this then shows a breakdown of, we really kind of try to squeeze as much as we can out of those $300 on each person's tax bill. And this is how it all breaks down in terms of the services that are provided out of the town general fund. The largest portion is our employee benefits. We employ about 50 full-time staff members, and that associated with that are their health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, as well as workers' comp and life insurance. We have a whole bunch of benefits that we provide to our employees, and that is a pretty large expense to the town. And then different portions of it, I tried to cut out ones that were less than 2%, so this didn't look too busy, but our justice court is about 9%, assessment about 8%, our senior program is pretty significant at 11%, but we do receive a lot of grant funding to support that program, and our parks, the maintenance of our parks, which has definitely seen more usage than we've ever seen before as a result of the pandemic, is about 10% of that general fund tax bill. Okay. Then moving on to the unincorporated area. So again, for those of our residents that live in the unincorporated area, this serves as their local municipality tax. So if you were living in one of the villages, it would sort of be equivalent to that tax. And again, it makes up about 15 to 25% of your tax bill. The services associated with that are for public safety, like police services, also code enforcement, recreation services, building planning and zoning, engineering and stormwater, road maintenance and road repairs and the administration of our highway department, as well as snow removal. Looking at, again, what that sort of looks like in real terms, the average assessed value for a home in the unincorporated area is slightly higher at $398,618. And again, also increased from last year where we were at about $385,000 as the average assessed value. The average
It's actually
town tax
slightly
bill-
lower.
I'm sorry?
It's slightly lower than the.
Oh, right, you're right. I'm sorry. Yes, yes. I was looking at the 52 and the 98. That's I forgot the first number, which is the most important one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that amounts to about an average tax bill for the unincorporated portion at about $2,155, which has increased by about $60 in the past year, as in terms of real dollars for people looking at paying their tax bill come April. So again, how that breaks down, the largest portion is actually for police services and public safety, which we have an IMA through the Village of Ossining to provide those services to the unincorporated area. Our highway maintenance and administration and garage and machinery and everything that goes into our highway department and snow removal sort of comes in second, about 22% of what is paid for in your unincorporated town tax bill. And then also employee benefits, again, is a big ticket item for the town for our employees. And then a little bit smaller is recreation or safety inspection, which is building and code enforcement. And very teeny tiny is planning and zoning, but I know that is very important to the residents of the unincorporated town and an important service that we provide. Okay. And then looking at special districts, again, residents who live in the unincorporated town also pay into these special districts. Our sewer fund, again, it's the consolidated sewer fund. We're losing the North State Road Sewer Fund this year. That's kind of zeroed out this year. Street lighting, fire protection, which is also through IMAs from the Village of Ossining and the Village of Briarcliff. Our refuse collection, and then our ambulance services. It's actually not just for the unincorporated town, also residents of the Village of Ossining pay into the ambulance district as well, except for Briarcliff Manor, they do not pay into it. So those are some of the special districts. So that does add on a little bit to a resident who lives in the unincorporated town, about $737 additional to the which totals to about $2,800 as the local municipality tax that a resident in the unincorporated area pays. I would like to note, for comparison purposes, residents who live in the Village of Ossining and the Village of Briarcliff do pay on average slightly higher than that, upwards of $3,000. So definitely residents who live in the unincorporated town get a pretty good bang for their buck. I think that's something that we realized in earlier on in the pandemic when we started looking at where we could possibly cut things or look for savings. Our budget has always been pretty lean, and we've always been pretty efficient about spending taxpayer dollars. So we were happy, but also it was a little challenging. We didn't have much fluff to cut. We really have everything we pay for is something that we really need to have and is important to the residents as well. Okay. Okay, so for our tax cap, I know this is something that probably there's a lot of misunderstanding about, so we tend to think of it as the 2% tax cap. But how it really reads is that the legislation says that a municipality is entitled to raise levy by 2% or the rate of inflation, whatever is lower that year. So this year, the rate of inflation is lower. It is at 1.0156%. So this year, we are really at a 1.0156% tax cap, which doesn't really roll off the tongue as fast as a 2% tax cap, but this is where we're at this year. As part of the calculation is a growth factor of 1.0136%. We were also able to carry over funds from the 2020 levy to the 2021 budget that we didn't use last year of about $87,000. Though all in all, we did come under our tax cap limit by about $55,000, which will help us next year. And that's something we can use as carryover funds towards the 2022 budget. So we're sort of setting ourselves up for success next year, which is really great. And this is our 10 out of 10 tax compliant budget in the era of the tax cap. So that's really great that we continue to be able to do that here in the town. Okay, moving now to our capital budget. So included in the tentative budget is sort of our proposed 5-year capital plan. What you'll see if you take a look at that document is that in our parks, we're really making a big focus on our courts and fields and some necessary improvements in that area. as well as the supervisor mentioned earlier, trying to take advantage of some of the low borrowing rates available right now. I think we're all sort of looking around and thinking about what can we do to try to help our community, help make sure our community and our economy and the workers in our community remain vibrant. And I think the supervisor dreamed up a really good plan to think about that and try to focus our energy to think about it in terms of like a New Deal era works progress administration. How can we as the town invest in not only our infrastructure, but also our local economy and some of our contractors who may be able to hire local people and put people back to work. So I think with this strategy, we're going to have a good benefit for the community, both improving our parks infrastructure, which people are using at a rate like we've never seen before, and also hopefully helping to bring some people back to work and investing in some of our local contractors and small family-owned businesses. Additionally, we have a couple of projects in some other areas of our budget where we have some grant funds that we've received previously that now we need to match those grant funds with town funds, as well as some projects that we've been thinking about and dreaming about for a while, but are sort of waiting for the right opportunity to come along. Unfortunately, this year, New York State didn't really roll out their typical suite of grants in the summer. So some of the projects like the Lewis Engle Park site plan, as well as renovations to some of the buildings and facilities at Cedar Lane Park, we weren't really able to look for grant funding this year, but we hope that next year and in the years coming, we can sort of ramp that up again and start looking for opportunities for grant funding for those projects we'd like to do. Okay, so I'm just gonna highlight a couple of some of the projects that we have in our capital plan. There's obviously a lot more in there, but these are some of the ones that are either new or just, a little bit more pressing that I wanted to highlight. So first and foremost, at Gerlach Park, last year we installed this multi-use gaming area, but unfortunately, we did not move forward with paving and striping and sealing this area. As you can see, it's not exactly this ideal site for play that you might find on the website of the company that we purchased this piece of equipment from. So next year, we would like to pave this area with port mix paving and use this special sealing product and stripe it for all sorts of different types of games. As you can see, it can be used for basketball, it can be used for soccer, it can be used for some types of like tennis and pickleball and things like that. So we hope to complete that this year as one of the projects I mentioned funded with.
And just to be clear, COVID put the kibosh on this project this year. And that was because we knew right away that, at the time when we would have been able to pave it and seal it, that we weren't able to play. Most of the sports were not allowed in this kind of area. So at the time, we couldn't pull it together then fast enough to get it done this year after we slowed and or stopped some of these major projects.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to quite make sense this year, but hopefully next year we can get it done in the spring. Also at Gerlach Park and also at Ryder Park, our parks foreman, Mario Velardo, has put in a request to either expand or replace some of the fencing because there's sort of become a little bit of a safety hazard. As you can see here, these two pictures here are from Gerlach. The fencing is not quite high enough to be safe if you're playing a game and a ball were to come over the fence. We need to increase the height of this fence here. You can also see the backstop here is rusted out and not in great shape, so it needs to be replaced. Same sort of situation at Ryder. The fencing is not particularly high enough. It doesn't have the proper fence netting as well. And as you can see, some of the fencing is not in great shape. So we're proposing that next year to replace the fencing at both of these ball fields where it's necessary, or, expand it up so that it's the proper height for what it should be to be a safe place for people to play. Also at Ryder Park, we have this process did start last year. As you can see, the supervisor got her hands dirty helping out the Parks Department with some of the prep work to seal and also restripe the tennis courts at Ryder. So the upper tennis courts, that process started. This is the upper tennis courts. The lower tennis courts are the ones that are in really not great shape. So the upper tennis courts, the process has already started. Next year, we'll complete the sealing and striping, painting phase. But the lower courts do require a lot more work in terms of improving the drainage and the retaining wall and all sorts of stuff that the Parks Department would like to start doing next year so that these can be playable areas. We have received a lot of phone calls in the office, I can say, of people who really want to go and play tennis or play other sorts of court sports in this area. So again, I think our intent is to also try to make sure that these spaces are available for different types of games, not just tennis, where we can take advantage of sort of this multi-use theory with some of our spaces to make them more accessible for more people and more fun for our residents.
And pickleball.
And pickleball, yes, definitely, of course, pickleball. Okay, and then into our highway and sewer fund, which doesn't have as many nice pictures. We have slated for next year the Morningside Drive repaving, which will be paid for by some grant funding we have through the multimodal program from Assemblywoman Galef, as well as our annual allocation of CHIPS funding and supplemented with fund balance from the highway and unincorporated area. The McCarthy Drive rehabilitation, this project was also put on hold this year due to COVID, just trying to consider if a big project made sense this year. This is a pretty big ticket item, closer to the $2 million range. So we will be using debt service to pay for this project and get it started in the spring. Also, as our highway superintendent, Pete Connolly, spoke about earlier today, they've been working on this guardrail replacement project over the course of the past couple of years. Pete has indicated he'd like to continue that next year with another phase of that program, as well as some facility improvements to our highway facilities, perhaps including replacing the garage floor and considering purchasing a new salt storage shed, which is not in great shape right now. Additionally, as Pete also explained earlier this evening, we have the North State Road and Parker Vale sewer generator replacements coming up soon. We have the bid opening this week. Those are going to be completed next year, but they are being paid for with debt financing from 2019 and 2020, but we're certainly excited to get those projects completed. In the cemetery, I stole this picture because I like the picture too, so we'll see it again. We're going to be completing the rehabilitation of the cottage into early next year. Additionally, Pete has indicated that using in-house labor and in-house work, we'll consider moving the cemetery office from the basement where it's located now to the first floor where it's been historically located in years past, to kind of keep it with the character and really take advantage of this wonderful rehabilitation project that we've completed this year. In the senior nutrition program, we received 2 grants from the Community Development Block Grant Program from Westchester County. First for the electric bus, which we have put out for a request for a price through the mini bid process with New York State OGS, as well as the renovation of the senior nutrition kitchen, which is in need of some improvements. I don't want to point out all the things that are wrong with it, but we do need to upgrade the ventilation system. There are some appliances that are not commercial grade appliances we need to repair, and we also have a dishwasher that doesn't work, which is not so helpful when you're in the height of preparing these meals for our seniors. So with funding from the CDBG program, we will be paying for this renovation as well as this new vehicle. However, the town does need to match those funds 50-50. So we've included those expenses in our capital fund for next year, also to likely be paid for it from debt service and this borrow that we'll do at the beginning of next year. Some more general project for our town offices, something we did discuss last year, but also sort of put on hold, realizing it might not be a priority this year, is replacing the website and redoing the website. I actually asked our webmaster to give me, I know it's sort of a little hard to see, but I can share it with the board later, a little bit of a mock-up of what he's been thinking to kind of modernize our website, make it easier to navigate, for a number of reasons. I mean, we've seen that our website has been very important during these times. I will say we have really good analytics about how our website's being used. We do see a lot of new users mostly. People seem to be able to find what they need just by visiting 2 pages, which is really great. And they only have to come to our website once to find what they're looking for. So our website's good, but it's not great, and we can definitely improve it. So we hope to complete that this year. Additionally, as a result of COVID, we've seen a need to reconsider how our offices are used and what sorts of areas of our building we occupy or allow the public to kind of come in and out of. So I have a picture here of what our town clerk's office looks like right now, which has really been the hub of everybody coming into our building, not really going to the second and third floors. As you can see, we have plexiglass there. We have some shared workspace between different departments. So going into 2021, we're going to be thinking hard about how we can consider for the future, not just for COVID, but also for safety reasons, to better use the space that we have in our buildings and make sure that we use it to the best extent possible. Okay, so what's next? All of these meetings are going to be held via Zoom, just like we have this evening. We have our public hearing scheduled for next Tuesday, or next Tuesday's legislative session. On December 1st, we will come back at work session and discuss any possible revisions that need to be made to the budget before the final adoption. And then again, like I said earlier, we have it sort of scheduled for final adoption on Tuesday, December 8th, if all goes as planned. But we do have a little bit of a buffer until the December 20th deadline by state law. And finally, all of these documents are available online. Anybody in the public can take a look at our tentative budget and review it, and submit any comments during the public hearing, or via email or phone or whatever in the interim. So
fantastic.
That is that.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And as a reminder, please join us next Tuesday, November 24th, for our public hearing on the 2021 budget in anticipation of the budget being approved at our December 8th legislative session. Thank you again to Dale and to Liz for all your hard work, mostly behind the scenes. Sometimes you visit us every once in a while in our offices, but we really do appreciate all the work that goes into crafting this budget, and we believe that we're offering a very responsible budget to the taxpayers at this tricky time. Is there anything that any of my council members have to say or ask about the budget? And go ahead, Councilman.
No, I just wanted to thank Dale and Liz for all the hard work they did. We went over them in depth in our budget hearings, so I'm good.
Councilman Welcher?
I just wanted to say a job well done. And this is the first time I didn't participate because I had a few other problems I had to take care of at this time. But I have been there for those budget meetings, and it is not simple. So I think you did a great job.
This is true.
And by the way, thank you, Dana and Victoria. I know you're the ones that crafted it originally.
I mean, I'll just say it's really, more than anything, it's a rollover budget with a couple of the highlights that Victoria mentioned. And we are grateful for all the department heads and the town board. And I think almost everybody on this phone call who has agreed to take a freeze. And that's, very much appreciated. I know that we all did it with our taxpayers in mind, knowing what a difficult time this is for everybody. So I think it's really important to say thank you to everybody who I will have to say, really just said yes right away as soon as we asked. Again, that was almost everybody, and we're very appreciative to all those almost everybody's.
And I will also just note that a lot of our contractors and consultants also didn't increase their rates going into 2021 as part of their, response to COVID. They work with a lot of governments, so we're also very grateful to those companies and consultants that we work with that also made that decision as well.
100%. So thank you again to everybody who has participated in keep holding the line. And again, we have this tax rate rollback. We know that there's still a little increase, but as you could see, it's relatively small compared to what the size of the budget is. And, when you really break it down to how much, let's see, I came up with about $34 a year that people pay on average for our parks.
Get a lot for $34
parks. Okay.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of bang for your buck with your town taxes, I will say. And again, we're grateful for all those who participate in giving that great bang for the buck. And thank you again to everybody. Can I have a motion to adjourn to executive session for do we decide personnel, advice of counsel, and
Yeah, I think we-
contracts? Yes, I think we have all three this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Jinx. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Please join us again on Thursday for our very first public engagement session on the Town of Austin Comprehensive Plan. This is the perfect opportunity to share your ideas, suggestions, and concerns about the future of the town and to help us create a blueprint to follow for at least the next 10 years. And again, this Thursday at 7 p.m. on Zoom, and you can find the link on our Facebook page and also on our website with the posting of the meeting at 7 p.m. Our next legislative session will be Tuesday, November 24th, starting at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. If you cannot join us live for any of these, but you want to know what was discussed, keep in mind that the town meetings are uploaded to the town Facebook and YouTube pages the morning after they air live. Thanks again for joining us tonight. I hope to see everybody this Thursday. Have a great night, everybody. Okay.